What if the greatest obstacle to mastering anything isn't lack of talent, time, or resources? What if it's something far more subtle, a trap built into the very way most people think about learning itself? A peculiar phenomenon that happens when someone believes they understand something. The mind relaxes. It stops questioning. It moves on. And yet, if you were to ask that person to explain what they just learned in their own words, without relying on the exact phrases from the textbook, something remarkable happens. The supposed understanding crumbles. The words are there, but the meaning isn't. This isn't a flaw in intelligence, it's a flaw in method. And it's everywhere. Walk into any classroom, anywhere people are trying to learn difficult material, and you'll see the same pattern repeating endlessly. Someone reads a chapter. They nod along, make sense as they flow past. They might even highlight the important parts, underline key phrases, perhaps write notes in the margins. They close the book feeling satisfied. They've put in the time. But something crucial hasn't happened. The information has entered through the eyes, but it hasn't transformed into understanding. The difference between these two states, having information versus having understanding, is everything. One is fragile, temporary, easily forgotten. The other is robust, permanent, full. One makes you dependent on references and memory. The other makes you unstoppable. Here's what usually happens. People treat their minds like filing cabinets. They take information and try to store it away neatly, labeled and organized. This seems logical. After all, that's what we're told to do. Read carefully. Pay attention. The important points. But the mind doesn't work like a filing cabinet. It works like a network, a vast web of connections where ideas link to other ideas. Understanding one thing depends on understanding its relationship to everything else. When someone reads a physics textbook and memorizes that force equals mass times acceleration, they have information. When they can look at a child pushing a toy car across a floor and see that equation in action, when they can predict what happens when the child pushes harder, or when they switch to a heavier car, they can explain why a baseball requires more force to throw than a ping pong ball at the same speed. That's understanding. Between these two states is where most learning fails, and there's a mental trick, a way of thinking, that bridges that gap completely. The trick isn't complicated, it requires something most people actively avoid: difficulty. Not the fake difficulty of reading the same page 20 times until the words blur together. Comfortable difficulty of writing out notes in increasingly neat handwriting. Real difficulty, the difficulty of confrontation with your own confusion. Here's how it works. Take whatever you're trying to learn and pretend you need to teach it to someone who knows nothing about the subject. Not just review it for them. Actually teach it. Explain it from the ground up. Use simple words. Draw pictures if you need to. And here's the crucial part. Do this without looking at your books or notes. What happens next is revelation. Within seconds, you'll hit a wall. Something you thought you understood will suddenly seem fuzzy. A concept that seemed clear when you read it will resist explanation. You'll reach for technical terms because you can't explain the actual mechanism. You'll realize that you know what something is called, but not what it actually is. This moment, this uncomfortable moment of discovering what you don't know, is the most valuable moment in learning. Most people run from it. They quickly flip back to their textbook to find the right words, the correct phrasing, anything to smooth over the rough patch. But that's exactly backwards. Patch is a signpost pointing directly at what you need to work on. The mind has a fascinating property. It can hold information in two completely different ways. There's the surface layer, fragile, word-dependent, context-bound. This is where most information lives after a typical study session. It's enough to recognize the right answer on a test, especially if the test uses similar wording to the textbook. But it vanishes quickly and provides no real power. There's the deep layer, robust, flexible, context-independent. Information stored here doesn't just sit passively. It actively connects to everything else. It can be accessed from multiple angles. It can be applied to new situations. It survives years of non-use. This is the kind of knowledge that makes someone truly capable. The mental trick that makes you unstoppable is simply this: force everything into that deep layer. Never settle for the surface. And the forcing mechanism is explanation. When you try to explain something in simple terms, you're not just reviewing it, you're testing it. Place where your explanation stumbles is a place where your understanding is shallow. Every concept you can't explain without using jargon is a concept you don't truly grasp. The mind can fake understanding when it's just reading. It cannot fake understanding when it's forced to construct an explanation from scratch. What happens in the brain when you read versus when you explain? Reading is passive. The author has done the work of organizing ideas, choosing words, constructing sentences. Follows along, and if the writing is clear enough, following along feels like understanding. But it's borrowed understanding. You're riding in someone else's vehicle. Explaining is active. You must build the structure yourself. You must decide what comes first, what depends on what, which details matter, and which are distractions. You must find your own words, your own examples, and most importantly, confront every gap in your knowledge head on, because there's nowhere to hide when you're the one doing the explaining. Here's the deeper principle at work. Standing isn't a thing you have, it's a thing you do. It's an active process of connecting new information to existing knowledge, of seeing patterns, recognizing the same principle operating in different contexts. You can't do this passively. The connections don't form themselves. They require effort, struggle, mental work. Someone truly understands something, they can explain it multiple ways. They can start from different points. They can use different analogies. They can adjust their explanation based on what the listener already knows. This flexibility is the signature of deep understanding. It means the knowledge isn't trapped in a single form, as a string of words. It's been decomposed into its fundamental components and can be reassembled in whatever form the situation requires. Consider how this works with something as basic as why the sky is blue. Most people who've heard the explanation can tell you it has something to do with light scattering, surface knowledge, but ask them to explain it without using the word scattering, and many would struggle. Ask them why it isn't violet, since violet has even shorter wavelengths. Most would have no answer. Ask them to draw a diagram showing what's actually happening to the light, and you'd see the understanding fall apart. Imagine someone who's forced themselves to truly understand this. They could explain it using analogies, maybe comparing it to how small obstacles affect waves in water differently than large ones. They could explain why sunsets are red using the same principle. They could predict what the sky would look like on a planet with a different atmosphere. Answer unexpected questions because they understand the mechanism, not just the label. This is what the mental trick produces. Not memorized answers, actual comprehension that can adapt to any question. The method extends beyond individual concepts. It works for entire subjects, complex systems, interconnected ideas. Take any field you want to master: mathematics, physics, biology, engineering, philosophy, whatever calls to you. The traditional approach is to move through it chapter by chapter, topic by topic, feeling satisfied when each section makes sense as you read it. But satisfaction in the moment of reading is not the same as understanding. Instead, after studying any material, close the books. Take a blank sheet of paper. Start explaining the material from scratch as if teaching someone. Don't write out memorized definitions, the concepts in your own words. Draw your own diagrams. Create your own examples. When you hit something you can't explain, mark it. Don't immediately look it up while you're stuck. What exactly don't you understand? What would you need to know to continue? Then, and only then, go back to the material. Don't just reread the section you were stuck on. This time, you know exactly what confused you. You have a specific question. The learning becomes targeted, efficient, passively absorbing information. You're actively hunting for specific understanding to fill specific gaps. This process is uncomfortable. That's how you know it's working. Comfort in learning usually means you're not learning much at all. You're reviewing, rehearsing, reinforcing what you already know. Real learning happens at the edge of your understanding, in that uncomfortable space where things aren't quite clear yet. there's something else happening here too, something subtle but profound. When you force yourself to explain things in simple terms, you're doing exactly what the greatest teachers do. You're stripping away unnecessary complexity. You're finding the essential truth underneath the technical language. Often, the technical language is needed for precision, but if you can't first explain the idea simply, the technical precision is meaningless. The brain naturally seeks patterns and connections. But it needs help. It needs to be forced to make those connections explicit. When you read that energy is conserved, that's a fact. When you explain why a pendulum swings back and forth, connecting the conversion between potential and kinetic energy, showing how this same principle explains why a roller coaster works, objects drop from the same height hit the ground at the same time regardless of their mass. Now you're building a web of understanding. The concept stops being an isolated fact and becomes a tool for understanding the world. This is why some people seem to learn so much faster than others. It's not that they're smarter. It's that they're learning differently. They're not collecting facts. They're building structures of understanding. Each new piece of knowledge connects to the structure, strengthening it, making it more useful. Someone who's just memorizing facts has to remember each piece individually. Someone who's built a structure only needs to understand the connections, and everything else follows logically. Let's make this concrete. Imagine two students studying thermodynamics. Both spend the same amount of time with the textbook. Both can pass the same test at the end of the week. The first student has memorized the laws of thermodynamics. They can state them. They can recognize them in problems. They can plug numbers into equations. 6 months later, they've forgotten most of it. The equations are gone. The specific problems they practiced are gone. If you ask them to explain why an ice cube melts in a warm drink, they might remember it's related to entropy. The connection would be vague. The second student did something different. After reading about thermodynamics, they spent time explaining it without the book. They started with simple questions: what is energy really? Why can't it be created or destroyed? What does that actually mean? They drew diagrams showing energy flowing from hot to cold. They explained why perpetual motion machines can't work. They connected it to everyday experiences. Why a hot cup of coffee cools down. Why a refrigerator needs power. Mixing hot and cold water always gives you lukewarm water. Never one drop of boiling and one drop of frozen. 6 months later, this second student still understands thermodynamics. Because they have better memory, but because they built understanding instead of memorizing facts. The structure is still there. The connections are still there. They can reconstruct the specific equations if needed because they understand what the equations mean. This is the power of the method. It's not a shortcut. It takes time, requires real mental effort, but it produces something completely different than traditional studying. It produces understanding that lasts, that applies, stronger over time instead of fading. Think about any skill you've truly mastered. Not something you've memorized, but something you can actually do. It's riding a bicycle, playing an instrument, speaking a language, working with your hands. Notice how your understanding of that skill isn't a list of facts. It's something deeper, something you can't fully put into words, but that you can demonstrate and apply in countless ways. That's what real understanding feels like in any domain. The mental trick that makes you unstoppable is bringing that same quality of understanding to everything you learn. Most people think that kind of deep understanding only comes with years of practice. But it doesn't. It comes with the right kind of practice. Kind of practice is forcing yourself to explain, to teach, to reconstruct understanding from first principles. Here's what this looks like in practice. Start with whatever you're learning right now. It doesn't matter if it's calculus or carpentry, history or chemistry. After your next study session, close everything, a blank piece of paper, or find a friend who doesn't know the subject. Explain what you just learned as if you're teaching a bright student who's never encountered this material before. Pay attention to where you struggle. Those struggles are information. They're showing you exactly where your understanding is weak. Don't judge yourself for the struggles. Be grateful for them. They're making the invisible visible. Without this process, You'd think you understood everything perfectly, right up until you needed to actually use the knowledge and found it wasn't there. When you find gaps, resist the urge to immediately look up the answer. Sit with the confusion for a moment. Think about what specifically is unclear. Is it a concept you don't understand, a connection you can't see, a step in the logic you can't follow? Identifying exactly what you don't understand is itself a profound form of understanding. Go back to your materials with a mission. You're not rereading everything. You're hunting for specific answers to specific questions. This makes the second pass through material incredibly efficient. You know what you're looking for. Your mind is primed to grasp it. Then explain it again. The second time through will be better, smoother, more connected. But you'll probably still find weak spots. That's fine. That's the process. Each cycle of explaining, finding gaps, filling them, and explaining again takes you deeper into genuine understanding. The beauty of this method is that it scales. You can use it for learning a single concept in 20 minutes or mastering an entire field over years. The principle is the same. Never settle for feeling like you understand. Prove to yourself that you understand by constructing explanations from scratch. There's one more aspect worth noting. You develop this habit, this refusal to accept surface understanding. Something interesting happens. You start seeing through complexity everywhere. You start recognizing when others don't really understand what they're talking about, even if they use impressive terminology. You develop a kind of intellectual honesty that's rare. You know the difference between knowing names and knowing things. This makes you formidable, not because you know more facts than others, but because what you do know, you truly know. You can apply it, you can extend it, you can explain it, you can build on it. Your knowledge isn't dead weight you're carrying around. It's a living tool you can use to understand new things, solve new problems, see connections others miss. The mind is capable of extraordinary things, but it needs the right method. It needs to be pushed beyond passive reception into active reconstruction. It needs to confront its own confusion honestly. It needs to build structures of understanding rather than accumulate piles of facts. This is the hidden mental trick that makes you unstoppable. Not positive thinking, not motivation, harder or longer. Simply this: never accept that you understand something until you can explain it in simple terms without reference materials. Every time you study, time you learn, every time you encounter something new, close the books and see if you can teach it. The discomfort you feel is understanding being forged in your mind. The gaps you discover are opportunities. The effort required is what transforms information into knowledge, knowledge into understanding, and understanding into capability. If there's one thing worth taking from this, it's this: stop reading to feel informed. Start explaining to become capable. The difference between those two states is the difference between someone who's heard about things and someone who actually understands them. And in any field, at any level, difference is everything.